The thunder came first, not from the sky, but from the earth itself. A rumble so deep it shook the coffee cups on kitchen counters 3 blocks away. Windows rattled in their frames. Dogs stopped barking and pressed themselves against porches, ears flat, instincts screaming danger. In Frost Hollow, Montana, population 180 souls, nothing this loud had ever arrived before. The sound grew, multiplied, a wall of mechanical fury rolling down Highway 191 like judgment itself. Chrome flashing in the winter sun, leather and steel moving as one living thing. 1,247 Harley-Davidson motorcycles, engines roaring in perfect, terrible unison. They came from 8 directions, north and south, east and west, and every point between, converging on a single destination, a single farmhouse. A single woman who stood on her porch with trembling hands pressed against weathered wood, watching an army descend upon her quiet world. Marlo Ashford was 73 years old. She weighed 108 pounds. She had $44 to her name and 72 hours before the bank took everything she had left. And she had no idea why 1,000 men on motorcycles had just surrounded her home. But that moment, that thunder, that fear, that overwhelming wall of sound and fury, that moment was still 18 hours away. 18 hours earlier, Marlo Ashford had been alone, just like every other night for the past 16 years. The farmhouse stood at the edge of Frost Hollow like a forgotten photograph, slowly fading in the Montana cold. 120 years old, white paint peeling in long strips, shutters that hung crooked on rusted hinges. The kind of house that speaks of better days, of Sunday dinners and children's voices, of life that once filled every room and now lives only in the silence between creaking floorboards. Now it was a monument to memory. Marlo sat in the kitchen, the only room she still heated. The rest of the house was too expensive to warm. Too big, too empty. She'd closed off the bedrooms upstairs years ago, shut the doors on the nursery that had never been used, on the guest room where her sister had stayed before the cancer took her. The kitchen was enough. A table scarred by decades of use, a chair with one uneven leg, a stove that worked 3 burners out of 4, a refrigerator that hummed too loud and kept things almost cold enough. Through the window, she could see the storm building on the horizon, dark clouds stacking like anvils against the pale winter sky. The weatherman on her old television had called for a blizzard, Category 5 conditions, wind chills 40 below zero, roads impassable, stay inside, stock up, prepare. Marlo had prepared the best she could. 4 eggs in the refrigerator, 2 carrots, 1 potato, a chicken carcass she'd been saving for soup, 3 tea bags, half a loaf of bread that was already 2 days past fresh, $44 in her purse, which needed to last until the first of the month, which was 9 days away, which didn't matter anyway because in 72 hours the bank was taking the house. She looked at the foreclosure notice on the table. She'd read it so many times the words had lost meaning, just shapes on paper. Legal terms, debt, default, seizure, eviction. $52,000. That's what she owed. 16 years of payments, scraping together what she could, selling everything that wasn't nailed down. The tractor, the truck, Tobias's tools, her mother's silver, her wedding ring, finally, last year, when the choice was the ring or the electricity. She'd kept the electricity. Tobias would have understood. Tobias. She looked at his photograph on the mantel above the fireplace. 1978, their wedding day. He'd been 26, she'd been 25. He was wearing a suit he'd borrowed from his brother. She was wearing a dress she'd made herself. They were standing in front of this very house, which his grandfather had built with his own hands in 1906. 32 years they'd had together, married young, grew old together, though not as old as they'd planned. Not enough, never enough, but more than some people got. The accident had been quick, at least. That's what the highway patrol officer had said, standing in this very kitchen, hat in his hands, voice soft with practiced sympathy. Your husband didn't suffer, ma'am. The impact was instant. He wouldn't have felt anything. Small comfort when you're 57 years old, and the man you've slept beside for 32 years is suddenly just gone. The medical bills had come later. $80,000 for a man who died anyway. The ambulance, the emergency room, the 3 hours they'd tried to save him before admitting defeat. All of it itemized, all of it due. They'd sold everything, the savings account, the retirement fund, the life insurance policy that turned out to be worth less than they'd thought. It had taken 6 years to pay it down to $52,000, and then the payments had stopped because there was simply nothing left to pay with. Marlo had applied for jobs. At 73, with a high school education and 32 years as a housewife, nobody was hiring. She'd tried online work, data entry, taking surveys. She made maybe $200 a month on good months. It was enough to keep the lights on, barely. She sold knitted scarves and hats on Etsy. $40 here, $25 there. People from Seattle and Portland buying authentic Montana crafts without knowing they were keeping an old woman from freezing. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. In 72 hours, the bank would come. They'd change the locks. They'd give her time to pack what she could carry. They'd direct her to the county shelter, where people her age went when they had nowhere else to go. A bed, meals, rules, curfews, strangers. Marlo had survived a lot in 73 years. The death of her parents, the sister lost to cancer, the husband taken too soon. The slow realization that she would die alone, without children to mourn her, without anyone to remember her name 5 years after she was gone. But she wasn't sure she could survive the shelter. Outside, the wind was picking up. The first snowflakes were starting to fall, small and hard, the kind that meant business. The storm was coming, the real one, the one that made the weatherman's voice go serious. Marlo stood and walked to the fireplace. She'd been rationing the firewood, burning only 1 log a night to keep the chill at bay. But tonight was going to be bad. She could feel it in her bones, the way old people do, the ache that came before weather, the body's ancient warning system. She added 2 logs to the fire, a luxury she couldn't afford. But if this was one of her last nights in this house, in the home Tobias had loved, in the place they'd built a life together, then she'd be warm. She made herself tea, one of the 3 remaining bags, Earl Grey. She held the cup between her palms and let the heat seep into her fingers, into the arthritis that made her hands stiff on cold days. The clock on the wall ticked toward 8 p.m. Outside, the storm arrived. The wind came first, a low howl that built to a shriek, throwing itself against the house like something alive and angry. The shutters banged. The windows shook. Snow began to fall in earnest now, thick and fast, erasing the world in white. Marlo moved to the window and looked out at nothing. Just white. Just wind. Just the kind of storm that killed people who were foolish enough to be caught in it. She was about to turn away when she heard it. Engines. Faint at first, distant, but growing louder. A mechanical growl beneath the wind's howl. Marlo frowned. Nobody drove in weather like this. Nobody was that foolish. The highway patrol shut down the roads when it got bad. And it was bad. But the sound grew louder. She pressed her face to the glass, cupping her hands around her eyes to block the kitchen light's reflection. Through the snow, she saw them. Lights, bobbing and weaving. 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 points of light cutting through the blizzard. Headlights. They were coming up her driveway. Fear shot through her chest, cold and sharp. Who would be driving in this? Why would they come here? She lived 2 miles from town, down a dirt road nobody used except her. There was nothing out here. No reason for anyone to come, unless they were lost, or unless they were something else. The engines grew louder. She could see shapes now through the snow. Dark figures on motorcycles, hunched against the wind, moving slowly through drifts that were already a foot deep. 20 motorcycles, 20 men in black leather, pulling into her yard, surrounding her house. Marlowe's hand went to her chest. Her heart was hammering. She looked at the phone on the wall. Should she call someone? The sheriff? But the phones were probably already down. They always went down in storms like this. And even if she could call, what would she say? Men on motorcycles are outside my house? In a blizzard? They'd think she was confused, having an episode. Old woman living alone imagining things. The engines cut off, one by one. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. Through the window she watched them dismount. 20 men. Big men, broad shoulders made broader by leather jackets. Faces hidden behind scarves and helmets. They moved stiffly like people who'd been riding too long in too much cold. One of them, taller than the rest, walked toward her porch. Marlowe stepped back from the window. Her breath was coming fast now, shallow. Her hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. The knock came. 3 heavy thuds against the door. She didn't move. The knock came again, harder. Then a voice, deep, rough, but not angry. "Ma'am, please, we need help." Marlowe pressed her back against the wall. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent, to wait them out, to pretend she wasn't home. They were strangers, men she didn't know, men who looked dangerous, who rode motorcycles through blizzards, who came to her door in the middle of nowhere on the worst night of the year. But that voice, there'd been something in it, desperation, real desperation. "Ma'am, we're freezing out here, please. We just need to get warm." She moved to the door but didn't open it. "Who are you?" "Travelers, ma'am. Just travelers. We got caught in the storm. Didn't know it would hit this hard. We're not here to hurt you. We just need shelter. There's a motel in town. Town's 2 miles back. Roads are already drifted shut. We barely made it here." Marlowe's hand hovered over the lock. Everything in her life had taught her to be cautious, to not trust strangers, to protect herself. She was a 73-year-old woman, alone in a house at the edge of nowhere. These were 20 men she didn't know. But there was that voice in her head, Tobias's voice, the one she heard sometimes late at night when the loneliness got too heavy. "Always help a traveler, Marlowe. The road is cruel. You never know when you might be the one who needs help." He'd said that to her more times than she could count, usually when he was bringing home strangers, hitchhikers he'd picked up, drifters who needed a meal. Once, a family whose car had broken down, who'd stayed 3 days while Tobias fixed their transmission. He'd never asked for payment, never expected gratitude, just did what he thought was right and moved on. Always help a traveler. She looked at his photograph across the room. In the firelight, he almost seemed to be watching her, waiting to see what she'd do. She took a breath. She turned the lock. She opened the door. The cold hit her like a fist. Wind and snow blowing into the kitchen, the temperature dropping 20 degrees in an instant. The man on her porch was massive. At least 6'3", 250 pounds of muscle under that black leather. His face was hidden behind a scarf, but she could see his eyes. Blue, bloodshot from the cold, and tired, so tired. Behind him, 19 more, all of them watching, all of them waiting. "Thank you," the big man said. His voice was hoarse. "Thank you, ma'am." Marlowe stepped back. "Come in, quickly, before all the heat escapes." They filed in one by one, stomping snow off boots, pulling off helmets, unwrapping scarves, revealing faces that were red and raw from windburn, from cold so severe it had turned their skin the color of meat. They were younger than she'd expected, most of them in their 40s and 50s, a few older, one boy who couldn't have been more than 19, his lips blue, his whole body shaking so hard his teeth chattered. They filled her kitchen, overfilled it, 20 men in a space meant for maybe 6. The smell of leather and gasoline and sweat and cold. They stood uncertainly, dripping melting snow onto her floor, looking at her like they couldn't quite believe she'd let them in. The big man pulled down his scarf. He had a beard, mostly gray, and a scar that ran from his left eyebrow down to his jaw. The kind of scar you got in a fight, the kind that said this was not a man to trifle with. But his eyes were gentle. "Ma'am, I'm Cade Merrick. We're just passing through, heading to Spokane. Didn't expect the storm to hit like this. We're grateful for the shelter. We won't be any trouble. We'll leave first thing when the road's clear." Marlowe looked at them, really looked. They were cold, genuinely, dangerously cold. The kind of cold that killed people if they didn't get warm soon. "You'll need to get out of those wet clothes," she heard herself say. "I have some old blankets upstairs, towels in the bathroom. The fire's not much, but it's warm." One of the men, older, maybe 60, with white hair and a kind face, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we don't mean to impose. We just need a few hours, just to thaw out. We've got sleeping bags. We can make do." Marlowe shook her head. "In this cold? Those sleeping bags won't help if you're already hypothermic. Come on, get closer to the fire. I'll make tea. We can't take your—" "I'm making tea," Marlowe said, more firmly than she felt. "Sit down before you fall down." They obeyed. These big, dangerous-looking men in leather and chains and tattoos that crawled up their necks. They obeyed a 73-year-old woman who barely came up to their shoulders. Marlowe moved to the stove. Her hands were shaking again, but she kept them busy. She filled the kettle. She put it on to boil. She looked in the cupboard and saw her 3 remaining tea bags and made a decision. 3 tea bags. 20 men. It would have to be weak, but it would be warm. She found her biggest pot and filled it with water. While it heated, she went to the refrigerator. 2 carrots, 1 potato, a chicken carcass. Soup. She could make soup. It wouldn't be much. It wouldn't be enough to fill 20 men, but it would be something. She chopped the carrots, peeled the potato, dropped the chicken carcass into the pot with some salt and the last of her black pepper. She added the 3 tea bags to another pot of water, let them steep until the water was the color of rust, then pulled them out and added them again, getting every last bit of flavor. The kitchen filled with the smell of cooking. Simple, humble, but warm. The men sat around her small fire, hands stretched toward the heat. They didn't talk much, just sat in exhausted silence. The kind of silence that came from surviving something difficult. Marlowe moved among them, handing out towels, showing them where the bathroom was, bringing them cups of weak tea that they accepted with quiet thank yous. She noticed the youngest one, the boy with the blue lips. He was shaking worse than the others. Sitting apart, arms wrapped around himself, she knelt beside him. "What's your name, son?" Jackson, ma'am." His voice was barely a whisper. "Jackson Caldwell." She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead. "Hot. Too hot. Fever." "Cade," she called. The big man turned. "This boy is sick. Help me get him closer to the fire." Cade was beside her in an instant. Together they moved Jackson right up against the fireplace, wrapped him in every blanket Marlowe could find. "He needs body heat," Marlowe said. She didn't know where the knowledge came from, just something she'd learned, somewhere, sometime. "2 of you, big ones, lie down on either side of him." 2 men, both easily 250 pounds, didn't hesitate. They lay down and pressed close to Jackson, creating a cocoon of warmth. Marlowe brought the soup. She ladled it into the only bowls she had, 5 of them, and told the men to share. They passed the bowls around, each taking a few sips before handing them on. 20 men sharing 5 bowls of thin vegetable soup, and nobody complained. Nobody asked for more. When the soup was gone, she brought out the half loaf of bread. It was stale, but she sliced it thin and passed it around. Again they shared, each man taking 1 small piece and making it last. She watched them eat her last food and felt Something. Not regret, not resentment. Something else. Something she couldn't name. Something that felt almost like purpose. Kate approached her as she stood by the stove. "Ma'am, you didn't have to do this. You didn't have to feed us. You were hungry. But this was your food, your supplies." Marlowe shrugged. "I'll manage." Kate's eyes moved to the table, to the foreclosure notice lying there in plain sight. She saw him read it, saw his jaw tighten, saw something change in his expression. "Ma'am, it's fine," Marlowe said quickly. "Don't worry about an old woman's troubles. You just focus on getting warm." But Cade was looking at her differently now, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected, something that mattered. And she saw him pull out his phone, snap a quick photo of the notice when he thought she wasn't looking. She said nothing. Let him do it. What did it matter? In 72 hours, the house would be gone anyway. The night wore on. The storm raged outside, wind screaming like something dying. Snow piled against the windows. The temperature dropped and dropped and dropped. But inside, 21 people sat around a small fire, and nobody was alone. Around 2 in the morning, Jackson's fever broke. His shaking stopped. His breathing evened out. The men on either side of him sat up, grinning with relief. "He's going to be okay," one of them said. Marlowe checked his forehead. "Cool now. Normal." She sat back on her heels and felt exhaustion crash over her like a wave. Cade helped her to her feet. "Ma'am, you should sleep. We'll keep the fire going. We'll watch over things." "I'm fine." "Please, you've done enough, more than enough. Let us take care of you for a few hours." Marlowe wanted to argue, but she was so tired. Tired in her bones, tired in her soul. She nodded. They made her a bed of coats near the fire, soft leather that still held the warmth of the men who'd worn them. She lay down and closed her eyes and fell asleep to the sound of 20 men breathing in her kitchen. Safe. Somehow, impossibly, she felt safe. Dawn came gray and cold. The storm had passed. The world outside was buried under 3 feet of snow, pristine and untouched, glittering in the weak morning light. Marlowe woke to find the men already up, already moving. They'd kept the fire going all night. The kitchen was warm, warmer than it had been in months. Cade was at the stove looking uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we were going to make breakfast, but—" "There's nothing to make," Marlowe finished. She stood, bones aching. "It's all right. I'll figure something out later." The men were packing up, gathering their things, getting ready to leave. Jackson was on his feet, color back in his face, looking sheepish. "Ma'am, I'm sorry I was such trouble," he said. "You weren't trouble, honey. You were sick. I'm just glad you're better." Outside, they could hear the sound of engines starting. Reluctant at first, protesting the cold, but finally catching, roaring to life. One by one, the men came to her, shook her hand, thanked her. Some of them had tears in their eyes. "You saved our lives, ma'am," one said. His voice broke on the words. "You gave us everything you had," said another. "Everything." "We won't forget this," said a third. "Ever." Cade was the last. He stood in her doorway, helmet in his hands, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read, something between gratitude and determination. "Mrs. Ashford, it is Ashford, right? I saw the name on the notice. I want you to know, what you did tonight, that's not something we take lightly. In our world, debts like this, they get paid. Always." "You don't owe me anything," Marlowe said. "You just stay safe out there." "We'll be back," Cade said. It sounded like a promise, like a vow, like something carved in stone. "Sooner than you think." He put on his helmet, walked out into the snow. Marlowe stood in the doorway and watched 20 motorcycles drive away, their tracks cutting black lines through the white. When they were gone, when the sound of their engines had faded to nothing, she closed the door. The house was quiet again, empty again, just her and the silence and the cold that was already creeping back in, now that 20 bodies weren't there to keep it at bay. She looked at the kitchen, at the empty soup pot, at the cupboards that held nothing, at the foreclosure notice still lying on the table. 72 hours had become 60 hours. The bank was coming. And Marlo Ashford was alone. Again. She sat down at the table and put her head in her hands and allowed herself, just for a moment, to cry. Not for the house, not for the money, but for the brief, shining moment when she hadn't been alone. When her kitchen had been full of life and voices and purpose. It had felt good to be needed again. It had felt good to help. It had felt good to matter. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the sky. The snow began to melt at the edges, dripping from the roof in a steady rhythm. In 18 hours from now, the thunder would come. But Marlo didn't know that yet. For now, she just sat in her empty kitchen and tried to figure out how to make $44 last 9 days before it stopped mattering at all. She looked at Tobias's photograph one more time. "I did what you would have done," she told him. "I helped the travelers." And in the silence that followed, she could almost hear him say, "I know, Marlo. I know." The morning after the storm broke quiet and cold. Marlo woke at 6, the way she always did, her body refusing to acknowledge that there was nothing left to wake up for. No chickens to feed. She'd sold the last 3 months ago. No garden to tend. Winter had claimed it. No reason to rise except the stubborn habit of 73 years of rising. She dressed in the dark, layers upon layers, because the fire had died overnight and the house held cold like a crypt holds bodies. Her fingers fumbled with buttons. Arthritis worse in winter. Everything worse in winter. In the kitchen, she boiled water for tea and remembered halfway through that she had no tea bags left. She'd used the last 3 for 20 men who were now miles away. Probably in Spokane by now. Probably warm in some hotel. Probably not thinking about the old woman who'd fed them her last meal. She drank hot water instead. Told herself it was almost the same. The bread was gone. The soup was gone. The cupboards were bare except for a half-empty container of salt and a bottle of cooking oil with maybe 2 tablespoons left in the bottom. $44 in her purse. She counted it again, even though she knew the number wouldn't change. 2 20s, 4 1s, the rest in coins. The walk to town was 2 miles. In summer it was pleasant, a chance to see the sky and feel useful. In winter, with 3 feet of fresh snow and wind chill that could freeze exposed skin in 10 minutes, it was an ordeal. But she needed food. She bundled herself in every coat she owned, wrapped a scarf around her face until only her eyes showed, pulled on boots that leaked but were all she had. She looked at Tobias's photograph. "Back by noon," she told him silently. Same as always. The road had been plowed, barely, a single narrow track down the middle where the county truck had passed, pushing snow into banks 8 feet high on either side. She walked in that track, careful of her footing, careful of her breathing. Cold air hurt her lungs, made her cough. It took her an hour to reach Frost Hollow proper. Main Street, all 4 blocks of it. The hardware store that only opened 3 days a week now. The diner that served breakfast until 2. The post office. The combination gas station and grocery store that kept the town alive. She pushed through the door and felt the blessed warmth of indoor heating. Her glasses fogged immediately. She pulled them off, wiped them on her coat, put them back on. Ernie Watts was behind the counter. 60 years old, owned the place, knew everyone's business. "Morning, Mrs. Ashford. Hell of a storm last night." "Morning, Ernie." "Yes, it was. Heard some bikers came through, 20 of them. You see anything out your way?" Marlo's hand tightened on her purse. "Why would I see anything?" "Oh, you know how it is. Small town. People talk. Deputy said he saw tracks heading out toward your place. Just making sure you were okay." "I'm fine, Ernie. Just need some groceries." She moved through the small store, doing math in her head. Bread, $2. Eggs, $4. A can of soup, $3. Rice, cheap, filling, $5 for a big bag. That was $14. Left her with $30 for the rest of the week. gas for the truck she didn't have anymore, medicine she couldn't afford anyway. She grabbed the items, carried them to the counter. Ernie rang them up slowly, watching her with eyes that held pity, and she hated pity more than she hated cold. $14.75, he said. She counted out exact change. Ernie bagged her items in plastic that crinkled too loud. Mrs. Ashford, about those bikers, you didn't let them in, did you? Why would you ask that? Just, you're alone out there. Strange men. You hear stories. I appreciate your concern, Ernie, because Opal Briarwood, she drove past your place this morning, said she saw motorcycle tracks all over your yard, said she saw your lights on all night. She was worried. Marlo kept her face neutral. Opal worries about a lot of things. She's just being a good neighbor. Is she? Marlo took her bag and walked out before Ernie could say anything else. Before the whole town could weigh in on her business. Before someone could tell her what she should or shouldn't have done. Outside, the cold hit her again. The sun was higher now, but gave no warmth. She started the long walk home. She'd made it maybe 3 blocks when the sheriff's truck pulled up beside her. Sheriff Dalton Graves, 52, former Army, good man mostly, but he followed rules like they were gospel. He rolled down his window. Mrs. Ashford, need a ride? I'm fine, Sheriff. It's 2 miles. You shouldn't be walking in this cold. I've walked it 1,000 times. Get in, Marlo, please. She hesitated, then climbed into the passenger seat. Warmth poured from the vents. Her glasses fogged again. Graves pulled back onto the road, drove slowly, careful of ice. Heard you had visitors last night. News travels fast. 20 bikers in a blizzard shows up at your door. Yeah, people notice. They needed shelter. Storm caught them. I gave them shelter. They left. That's all. That's all. Graves was quiet for a moment. Marlo, I need to ask. They didn't hurt you? Didn't threaten you? No. Didn't take anything? Sheriff, I don't have anything to take. He flinched at that. They both knew it was true. I'm just saying you need to be careful. You're alone out there, vulnerable. These biker gangs, they're not always what they seem. They were cold, Dalton. They were human beings who were cold. I gave them soup and they left. That's the beginning, middle, and end of the story. He pulled into her driveway. Motorcycle tracks everywhere, black scars in the white snow. Bank examiner is coming tomorrow, he said quietly. 3 p.m. I'm sorry, Marlo. I tried to get you more time. I know you did. County shelter has space. It's not ideal, but it's warm. 3 meals a day. Better than... He gestured at her house. At the peeling paint and sagging porch and chimney that listed slightly to the left. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. Tomorrow at 3, this won't be your house anymore. She climbed out, took her bag of groceries. Thank you for the ride, Sheriff. She watched him drive away, stood in her driveway looking at her house. This house, Tobias's grandfather's house, 120 years of family history, weddings and funerals and births and deaths, all of it ending tomorrow at 3 p.m. because she owed $52,000 she'd never be able to pay. Inside, she unpacked her groceries, put the eggs in the refrigerator, the bread in the bread box, the rice in the cupboard, the soup on the counter where she'd see it and remember not to eat it too fast. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the foreclosure notice. Final notice. Those words in bold red letters like a wound. She should feel something, she thought. Rage, maybe. Despair. Terror at the future, at the shelter, at dying alone in a room full of strangers. But she just felt tired. So tired. She put her head down on the table, on top of the foreclosure notice, and closed her eyes. Outside, clouds were gathering again. The weatherman on the television she couldn't afford to run said another storm was coming. Smaller than last night's. Just a few inches. But still, always another storm coming. Always. 600 miles away, In a motel room outside Portland, Oregon, Cade Merrick sat on a bed that smelled like cigarettes in despair and stared at his phone. The photograph he'd taken was still there. He'd looked at it maybe 50 times since yesterday. The foreclosure notice. Marlo Ashford's name. $52,000. Due in 72 hours. No, not 72 anymore. More like 60 now. Around him, his brothers were scattered across 2 motel rooms, sleeping mostly, exhausted from the ride, from the storm, from nearly dying in the cold. Jackson was in the next room, fever gone, sleeping the deep sleep of the young and recovered. They'd gotten lucky. If that old woman hadn't opened her door, if she hadn't shared her last food, Jackson might have died. Hell, they all might have died, frozen to death in a Montana blizzard because they'd been too stupid to check the weather, too arrogant to think nature could kill them. But she'd saved them. A 73-year-old woman with nothing had saved 20 men who should have known better. And now she was losing her house. Cade looked at the photo again, read the fine print. Blackwood County Bank, property seizure, failure to pay. All the legal language that meant the same thing. We're taking everything you have, and there's nothing you can do about it. He thought about her kitchen, the bare cupboards, the watered-down soup, the way she'd given them everything and acted like it was nothing. In his world, debts got paid. Always. That was the code. You didn't take from people who had nothing and walk away. You didn't accept charity from the desperate without giving back. He picked up his phone, scrolled through his contacts to a name he hadn't called in 2 years. Hadley Drummond. Everyone called him Dutch. Had since the 70s, when he'd been young and wild and building what would become the largest motorcycle brotherhood in the Pacific Northwest. Now he was 70 years old, living in a farmhouse outside Seattle, retired from the life but still the man everyone called when things got serious. Cade hit dial. 3 rings, then a voice, rough as gravel, warm as whiskey. Cade Merrick, thought you were dead. Not yet, old man. Storm catch you boys? Yeah, it was bad. Where'd you hole up? Farmhouse, middle of nowhere, old widow. She took us in. Silence on the other end. Then, she asked for anything? Nothing. Gave us everything she had. Soup from scraps, her last food. We would have died without her. More silence. Longer this time. When Dutch spoke again, his voice had changed. Gone serious. Gone old. What do you need, Cade? She's losing her house. Bank foreclosure. $52,000 in debt. They're taking it tomorrow. Tomorrow. 3 p.m. Where? Frost Hollow, Montana. 47 miles south of the Canadian border. Population 180. Dutch was quiet for so long, Cade thought the call had dropped. Then, Cade, do you know what you're asking? I know. Angel's debt. That's what you're calling. Yes. Angel's debt means I call everyone, every chapter, every rider who can make it. That's 11 states, Cade. That's over 1,000 brothers. I know what it means. For one old woman. For one old woman who gave 20 strangers her last food while facing homelessness. Yeah, for her. Dutch breathed out slow. Cade could almost see him, sitting in his kitchen, running a hand through white hair, doing the math. Distance, time, logistics. What's her name? Marlo Ashford. And you're sure about this? You're sure she's worth it? Cade thought about Marlo's face. The way she'd knelt beside Jackson without hesitation. The way she'd moved through that kitchen, feeding them, caring for them, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She's worth it. Okay. Just like that. One word. Okay, Cade, I'll make the calls. But you need to understand what you're starting here. This is going to be big. This is going to be loud. 1,000 men on motorcycles descending on a town of 180 people. It's going to look like an invasion. I know. And if we're doing this, we're doing it right. Not just paying her debt, the whole thing. House repairs, food, security, whatever she needs. We take care of our angels, Cade. Completely. That's what I'm asking for. Okay, give me 24 hours. I'll have brothers rolling by noon tomorrow. Dutch? Yeah? Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just make sure she's home tomorrow at 3. And Cade, you might want to warn the local sheriff. This is going to scare people. The line went dead. Cade sat holding his phone, feeling the weight of what he'd just set in motion. Angel's debt wasn't called lightly. In 40 years of riding, it had only been invoked 3 times. Once for a nurse who'd saved a chapter president's life in an ER. Once for a teacher who'd hidden bikers from police during an unjust raid. Once for a single mother who'd given her house as sanctuary during a gang war. Each time, the Brotherhood had responded with overwhelming force. Not violence, never violence, but presence, power. The unmistakable message that this person was under protection, that anyone who hurt them would answer to 1,000 brothers. And now it was being called for Marlo Ashford. Cade walked to the window. Dawn was breaking over Portland. Somewhere out there, Dutch was already making calls. To Seattle, to Spokane, to Boise, to Billings and Missoula and Helena and Great Falls and Kalispell and every other city and town where brothers lived and rode. By noon, they'd be moving. By midnight, they'd be converging. By tomorrow at 3 p.m., when the bank came to take Marlo's house, they'd be there, all of them. Cade smiled. The old woman had no idea what was coming. In Seattle, Dutch hung up the phone and sat for a long moment in his kitchen, looking at nothing. Angel's debt. He hadn't heard those words in 10 years. His wife, Margaret, came in from the bedroom, wrapping a robe around herself. Who was that? Cade Merrick. How is he? Calling in a debt. Margaret knew better than to ask questions. She'd been married to Dutch for 48 years. She knew the code, knew the rules, knew that when a call like this came, you didn't interfere. She poured him coffee and kissed the top of his head and went back to bed. Dutch pulled out his own phone, started scrolling through contacts. 47 chapter presidents across 11 states. Some of them he'd installed himself back in the day. Some were new blood, men he barely knew. But they all answered to the code. He started with Portland. Max Tombstone Riley, 53, chapter president for 6 years. Dutch, it's 5 in the morning. Angel's debt, Max. I need every brother in Portland who can ride. Destination, Frost Hollow, Montana. Departure, noon today. Silence. Then, Jesus, who's the angel? Old widow, fed 20 of Cade's crew during last night's blizzard. Gave them everything she had. She's losing her house today. We'll be there. How many can you bring? 80, maybe 90. Good, pass the word. Everyone brings what they can. Cash, tools, food, whatever. This is a full response. Understood. Next call. Boise, then Spokane, then Billings. Each time the same conversation. Each time the same response. We'll be there. By 7 a.m., Dutch had called 47 chapter presidents. By 8 a.m., over 1,000 men across the Pacific Northwest knew they were riding today. By 9 a.m., parking lots were filling with motorcycles. Men kissing wives goodbye, packing saddlebags, checking tire pressure and oil levels. By 10 a.m., the first chapters were rolling. By noon, Highway 191 North was carrying a river of chrome and leather and thunder toward a town that had no idea what was coming. In Frost Hollow, Marlo woke from a fitful sleep at her kitchen table. Her neck ached from the angle. Her back screamed when she tried to straighten it. The clock said 2 p.m., 1 hour. She stood slowly, joints protesting. Looked around her kitchen. At the dishes she'd washed 1,000 times. At the curtains she'd sewn by hand. At the table where she'd eaten 44 years of meals with Tobias. She should pack, she thought. Should gather what she could carry. Clothes, photos, papers. But she couldn't make herself move. Instead, she walked through the house, room by room, saying goodbye. The living room where Tobias had watched Sunday football. The bedroom where they'd slept side by side for 44 years. The bathroom where she'd bathed him when he was sick, where he'd held her when she cried. Upstairs, the guest room where her sister had stayed. The nursery they'd prepared 3 times and never filled. 3 pregnancies that had ended in heartbreak and hospital visits and coming home to emptiness. She stood in the nursery doorway, looking at the crib they'd never disassembled, at the rocking chair that had never held a baby, at the mobile of stars that had never spun above a sleeping child. She'd thought this house would be filled with life, with children and grandchildren and holidays and noise. Instead, it had been just the 2 of them, growing old in rooms that echoed. And now it would be neither of them. Downstairs, a car door slammed. Marlowe looked out the window. A black sedan in the driveway. A man in a suit getting out carrying a briefcase. Behind him, Sheriff Graves's truck. 3 p.m., right on time. She went downstairs slowly, opened the door before they could knock. The man in the suit was young, 30 maybe, uncomfortable in his skin. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm Richard Pemberton from Blackwood County Bank. I'm here regarding the foreclosure of—" "I know why you're here. Ma'am, I'm very sorry, but we have a legal order to take possession of this property. The debt has not been satisfied. The grace period has expired. As of 3 p.m. today, this house belongs to the bank." Behind him, Graves looked miserable. "Marlowe, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She nodded, couldn't speak. If she spoke, she'd cry, and she'd promised herself she wouldn't cry. Pemberton was pulling papers from his briefcase. "You'll need to vacate within 24 hours. You can take personal belongings, but all fixtures, appliances, and furniture are now property of—" He stopped. They all stopped. Because they heard it, distant at first, like thunder, like an earthquake. A rumble that grew and grew until it wasn't just sound anymore, but physical sensation. The ground shaking, the air vibrating. Marlowe turned, looked toward the highway, and saw them coming. From the south, a wall of motorcycles, hundreds of them, chrome flashing in the afternoon sun, engines roaring like the voice of God. From the north, more. From the east, from the west, converging on her small farmhouse from every direction at once. The rumble became thunder. The thunder became apocalypse. Pemberton's mouth fell open. "What the hell?" But Marlowe couldn't hear him over the sound of 1,247 motorcycles arriving at her door. They filled her yard, her driveway, the road, the field beyond. An army of leather and steel and thunder surrounding her small house, engines idling in perfect unison, waiting. From the lead bike, a man dismounted, white hair, 70 years old, walking with a cane but with his back straight and his eyes sharp. He walked through the snow toward her porch. The other bikers parted for him like water. He stopped at the bottom of her steps, looked up at her with eyes that had seen half a century of road. And then, with all the formality of a knight before a queen, he removed his helmet and bowed his head. Behind him, 1,246 men did the same. The silence that followed was more powerful than the thunder had been. Dutch looked up at Marlowe. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "My name is Hadley Drummond, but most people call me Dutch. I believe you gave shelter to some brothers of mine last night." Marlowe couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Ma'am, in our world, when someone saves our lives, we don't forget. We don't walk away. We pay our debts." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you." He climbed the steps, handed her the envelope. With shaking hands, Marlowe opened it. Inside was a cashier's check, $52,000, paid in full. She looked at Dutch, at the 1,000 men behind him, at the impossible, overwhelming, beautiful thing that was happening. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You gave everything to save strangers," Dutch said simply. "Now strangers are giving everything to save you." Behind him, engines roared in unison. Not a threat, a celebration. And Marlo Ashford, who had been alone for so long, who had been so tired, who had thought she'd lost everything, stood on her porch and watched an army bow to her. And finally, she let herself cry. The check trembled in Marlo's hands like a living thing. $52,000, the exact amount, to the penny. She looked at the numbers, then at Dutch, then at the sea of men stretching across her property, and her mind couldn't make sense of any of it. Behind her, Pemberton, the bank examiner, stood frozen, briefcase still open, papers half pulled. Sheriff Graves had his hand on his radio, but hadn't called anything in. Both men were statues, caught in the blast radius of something they'd never seen before. Dutch stood on her porch, cane in one hand, the other extended toward her in a gesture that was somehow both gentle and immovable. "Ma'am, that check is real. It'll clear. Blackwood County Bank will verify it. Your debt is paid." "But I can't," Marlo's voice cracked. "This is too much." "It's $41.70 per rider," Dutch said quietly. "That's what we each chipped in. For most of these men, that's half a tank of gas. One good meal, a night in a cheap motel. Not much at all." His eyes held hers. "But you gave us everything you had. Your last food, your warmth, your trust. You can't put a price on that, Mrs. Ashford. We're not trying to. We're just trying to say thank you the only way we know how." From the yard, a voice called out, "For the angel!" It was picked up, repeated, rolled through the crowd like thunder. "For the angel! For the angel!" Marlo pressed the check to her chest and felt something break open inside her. Not breaking apart, breaking open, like a seed that had been waiting in frozen ground for spring. Pemberton found his voice. "Mrs. Ashford, I'll need to verify this with the bank, but if it's legitimate, then the foreclosure is canceled. The property remains yours." He looked at the 1,000 men surrounding the house and swallowed hard. I'll go make that call." He practically ran to his car. Graves moved to the porch, eyes wide. "Dutch Drummond, I'll be damned. Heard stories about you for 30 years. "Sheriff," Dutch nodded respect, "we're not here for trouble." "I can see that." Graves looked at Marlo. "You okay, Marlo?" She nodded because she couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down her face and she didn't care. Let them see. Let them all see. For 16 years, she'd held everything in, held everything together, kept the pain and the loneliness and the fear locked away where no one could see it. But this kindness from strangers, this impossible grace, it broke through every wall she'd built. Dutch turned to face the assembled riders, raised his hand. The engines cut off, every single one, in a silence so complete that Marlo could hear snow sliding off the barn roof 200 feet away. "Brothers," Dutch called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "This is Marlo Ashford. Last night, during the worst blizzard in 20 years, she opened her door to 20 of our own, fed them her last food, saved a life, asked for nothing in return. Today we return the favor, not because she asked, not because she needs us, but because it's right. Because in our world, angels get protected, always." The men stood silent, respectful. 1,000 faces turned toward her like flowers toward sun. Dutch looked back at Marlo. "Ma'am, with your permission, we'd like to do a little more than just pay your debt." "More?" Marlo's voice was barely a whisper. "This is already too much." "Your roof's got holes," Dutch said gently. "Saw it from the road. Your barn's listing to the left. Porch steps are rotted through in 2 places. Paint's peeling. I'd bet money your water heater's on its last legs, and your wiring hasn't been updated since the 70s. Marlo opened her mouth to protest, but Dutch raised a hand. "We got carpenters, electricians, plumbers, painters, mechanics, men who build things for a living, and who've got nothing better to do on a Saturday afternoon than help an angel." He smiled. "If you'll let us." "I can't pay you. We're not asking to be paid. We're asking permission to help." Marlowe looked at her house, at the peeling paint Tobias had always meant to fix, at the roof that leaked when it rained hard, at the barn where she'd stored nothing for 5 years because it wasn't safe, at all the decay and deterioration that came from being old and alone and too poor to maintain what time was taking. She looked at Dutch, at his white hair and his steady eyes and his cane that spoke of his own battles with time. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do all this for someone you don't even know?" Dutch was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of fabric, faded red and black, a bandana worn soft with age. He held it up so she could see the embroidery. Iron Brotherhood, Ride Forever. 1995, he said. I was riding through Montana, late November, got caught in a storm. Bike broke down on Highway 191 right near here. I was 39 years old and stupid enough to think I could walk to town. Would have frozen to death if a man in a truck hadn't stopped. He didn't know me, had no reason to help, but he threw my bike in the bed of his truck, drove me to a farmhouse, and let me stay 3 days while he fixed my transmission. Wouldn't take a penny, told me to pass it on someday. Marlowe's breath caught. Her hand went to her mouth. His name was Tobias Ashford, Dutch said softly. And this bandana? He gave it to me when I left. Said, keep this to remember that the road's not as cruel as people think. Not if we take care of each other. Dutch's eyes were bright. I've kept it for 31 years, Mrs. Ashford, waiting for a chance to pay that debt. And when Cade called me yesterday and told me what you'd done, told me who you were, I knew. This was it. This was the moment. Marlowe couldn't see through her tears. Tobias, she whispered. He never told me. Men like Tobias don't tell, Dutch said. They just do, and hope it matters. He held out the bandana. This belongs here, with you. It's come home. Marlowe took it with shaking hands, pressed it to her face. It smelled like leather and road and time, but underneath she could almost catch it. The scent of the cologne Tobias used to wear. Old Spice, cheap and simple, and him. He'd want this, Dutch said. He'd want you cared for, protected, safe. So if you'll let us, ma'am, we're going to make that happen. Marlowe nodded. Couldn't speak, just nodded. Dutch turned back to the assembled riders. All right, brothers, let's get to work. What happened next would be talked about in Frost Hollow for the next 50 years. The men moved like a machine. No chaos, no confusion. Just practiced efficiency that spoke of crews who'd done this before, who knew their roles, who trusted each other completely. 20 men unloaded trucks that had appeared as if by magic. Lumber, shingles, paint, tools, supplies that must have cost thousands of dollars, all of it donated, all of it freely given. 50 men swarmed the roof. They worked in teams, stripping old shingles, replacing rotted boards, laying new weatherproofing, installing new shingles in a rhythm that was almost musical. Hammer, nail, a percussion of repair. 30 men surrounded the barn. The listing was fixed in an hour, new support beams installed, the whole structure reinforced and strengthened. They replaced siding, fixed the doors that hadn't closed properly in a decade, built new stalls inside for animals Marlowe didn't have, but might someday, if she wanted. 40 men painted, the whole house, scraped the old paint, primed the wood, rolled on fresh white that made the farmhouse look like it had in the photographs from Tobias's grandfather's time. Clean, proud, cared for. 20 men worked on the porch, ripped out rotted boards, replaced them with new lumber, reinforced the railings, fixed the steps. One of them, a man with tattoos covering both arms and a face like weathered stone, carved a small detail into the top step. A rose, for beauty, for permanence. Inside, electricians rewired the kitchen. Plumbers replaced the water heater and fixed the leak under the sink that Marlowe had been catching in a bucket for 2 years. A carpenter rebuilt the cabinet doors that hung crooked. Another installed new windows in the bedroom where the old ones let in drafts that made winter unbearable. And through it all, Dutch sat with Marlowe on the one part of the porch that wasn't being rebuilt, and they talked. He told her about the road, about 40 years of riding, about the brotherhood that had become his family when his blood family had given up on him, about the code they live by: help those who help others, protect those who can't protect themselves, pay your debts, keep your word, ride free but never alone. She told him about Tobias, about their 44 years together, about the children they tried to have and lost, about the quiet life they'd built in this house, simple and hard but filled with love, about the loneliness after he died, the silence that had grown so loud she sometimes couldn't bear it. "You won't be alone anymore," Dutch said. "That phone I'm giving you, it's connected to every chapter in 11 states. You need something, anything, you call. Someone will answer. Always. That's the promise." "I don't understand why," Marlowe said. "I only gave them soup." "You gave them hope," Dutch corrected. 20 men, caught in a storm, thinking they might die. And you opened your door. You didn't have to. You had every reason not to. Old woman, alone, strange men. But you did it anyway. You know what that says? It says the world isn't as dark as it seems. It says kindness still exists. It says we're not alone. He looked at the men working on her house. Most of these brothers, they've had hard lives, broken homes, addiction, poverty, violence. The road saved them because it gave them purpose. Brotherhood saved them because it gave them family. But sometimes you need to be reminded why you keep going, why you keep trying, why you keep believing in something better. He turned to her. You reminded 20 men that angels exist. And word spread. And now 1,200 men are here because they want to believe it too. They want to know that if they're ever lost in a storm, someone like you might open a door. Marlowe looked at the activity surrounding her house, at men giving their Saturday to help a stranger, at the care they were taking with every detail, at the smiles on their faces as they worked. "I'm not an angel," she said quietly. "Maybe not," Dutch agreed, "but you're close enough for us." The work continued through the afternoon. The sun tracked across the sky. The temperature dropped, but the men didn't stop. Some of them had been riding since dawn. Some hadn't slept. But they worked with the fierce dedication of men on a mission. Townspeople started appearing, tentatively at first. Opal Briarwood drove past 3 times before finally parking and walking over. She looked at the bikers, at the work, at Marlowe sitting on the porch with Dutch, and her face went through a series of expressions too complicated to name. "Marlowe," she said carefully, is everything?" "Everything's fine, Opal," Marlowe said. There was something in her voice, a strength that hadn't been there before. "These men are helping me fix my house." "I can see that." Opal looked at the new roof, the fresh paint, the rebuilt porch. "It looks good." "It looks like," Marlowe corrected. Other neighbors came, stood at a distance, watched. Graves stayed, directing traffic, making sure the curious didn't get in the way. Pemberton came back from the bank looking shell-shocked. "The check cleared," he said. "The foreclosure is canceled. The property is yours, Mrs. Ashford, free and clear." "Thank you, Mr. Pemberton." He looked at the bikers, at the transformation happening before his eyes. "I've been doing this job for 8 years. I've never seen anything like this." "Neither have I," Marlowe said. "Neither have I." By 5 p.m. the work was essentially done. The house looked 20 years younger. The barn stood straight and strong. Solar panels had been installed on the roof, a gift from a chapter in Seattle whose president owned a renewable energy company. A new water filtration system sat in the basement. The wiring was up to code. The plumbing worked perfectly. Every window opened and closed smoothly. But the men weren't done. Trucks arrived with supplies. Food, 6 months' worth, according to the manifest. Rice and beans and canned goods and flour and sugar and coffee and tea. enough to fill every cupboard, every shelf, every available space in the kitchen and pantry. More trucks brought firewood, 2 full cords stacked neatly beside the house, enough to keep her warm through 3 winters. A trailer pulled up with livestock, 4 chickens already laying, 2 goats, gentle and friendly, a barn cat to keep mice away, animals that would give her eggs and milk and companionship. One man, younger than the rest, maybe 30, approached Dutch. "Sir, the trust fund is established. 200,000 managed by First Security Bank in Billings. Generates about 600 a month in interest. Should be enough for her to live comfortably." Dutch nodded, turned to Marlowe. "That's from the Brotherhood General Fund. We vote every year on who needs help. This year, it was unanimous. The money's yours. Use it however you want. Buy groceries, fix what breaks, go on vacation. Doesn't matter. It's just there so you never have to choose between heating and eating again." Marlowe shook her head. "This is too much. All of this is too much." "It's not enough," Dutch said simply. "It'll never be enough, but it's what we can do." As the sun began to set, the men gathered in the yard. 1,247 bikers standing in rough formation, faces turned toward the porch where Marlowe stood with Dutch. Dutch raised his hand for silence. Got it instantly. "Brothers," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "The work is done. The debt is paid. But before we ride, there's one more thing." He turned to Cade, who'd been working on the barn all afternoon. Cade came forward carrying something wrapped in leather. He knelt before Marlowe, unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a vest, black leather, beautifully made, with patches sewn on with care. The main patch across the back said, "Iron Brotherhood, Honorary Mother." "Mrs. Ashford," Cade said, his voice rough with emotion, "this vest marks you as family, as protected, as loved. Any brother anywhere sees this, they know who you are. They know what you mean to us. And they'll give you anything you need, no questions asked." He stood, helped her into the vest. It was heavy, but warm. The leather smelled new and rich. Dutch handed her something else, a red phone. Satellite-enabled, judging by the thick antenna. "Speed dial 1 reaches me. Speed dial 2 reaches chapter emergency line. You call, we answer. Day or night, storm or sun, always." Finally, he gave her the frame bandana, Tobias's bandana, mounted in a simple wooden frame with a small plaque. "In memory of Tobias Ashford, who taught us kindness, 1995 to 2026. Marlowe held it and finally completely broke down, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Dutch held her, this old man holding this old woman, while 1,200 bikers stood silent witness to grief and joy tangled together. When she could speak, Marlowe looked at them all, at these men who'd come from hundreds of miles away, who'd given time and money and skill and love to someone they didn't know. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was small, but it carried. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for remembering Tobias. Thank you for reminding me that the world has kindness in it still." Dutch stepped back, raised his hand. "Brothers, start your engines." The sound that followed shook the earth. 1,247 motorcycles roaring to life in perfect synchronization. But it wasn't threatening now. It was celebration. It was joy. It was the sound of family saying goodbye, but not farewell. They formed up in a line, single file, a parade that would take 45 minutes to complete. And as each biker passed Marlowe's porch, he did 3 things. First, he saluted her. A proper salute, hand to forehead, respect given freely. Second, he placed a flower on her porch steps. Roses, most of them. Some carnations. Some wildflowers that had been picked from God knows where. By the time the parade ended, there were 1,247 flowers, creating a carpet of color against the white snow. Third, he said 2 words. "Thank you, ma'am." Some said it loud. Some whispered. Some had tears in their eyes. Some smiled. But every single one said it. "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. 1,247 times. Marlowe stood on her porch and received it all. The salutes, the flowers, the gratitude. She stood in her new leather vest on her rebuilt porch in front of her restored house and felt what she hadn't felt in 16 years. Seen, valued, loved. The parade took an hour. By the time the last bike rolled past, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that seemed too beautiful to be real. Dutch was the last to leave. He hugged Marlowe one final time. "You need anything," he said. "Anything at all." "I know," she said. "Thank you, Dutch, for all of it, for remembering Tobias, for this. He was a good man. You're a good woman. The world needs more of both." He climbed onto his bike. "Oh, one more thing," he gestured to three men who'd stayed behind. "This is Marcus, Lee, and Jake. They're staying in town tonight. Tomorrow they're installing a security system. Cameras, alarms, motion sensors, just in case. Can't have our angel unprotected." "That's really not. It's already decided," Dutch said with a smile. "Argue with them if you want. They won't listen." He kicked his bike to life, gave her one last salute, and rode away into the sunset like something from a movie. Marlowe stood on her porch until she couldn't hear the engines anymore, until the only sound was wind in the trees and chickens settling in their new coop, and the distant bark of a dog in town. She looked at her house, at the fresh paint and new roof and straight barn, at the flowers covering her steps, at the world these strangers had given back to her. Then she went inside. The kitchen was warm, the new heater humming quietly, the cupboards full, the lights bright without flickering. She made herself tea, real tea, from the boxes the bikers had left, Earl Grey. She sat at her table and held the cup and looked at Tobias's photograph. "You would have loved this," she told him. "All these men, all this noise. You would have been out there helping, probably, showing them the right way to fix the barn, telling them stories." She smiled. "Dutch remembered you. After 31 years, he remembered." The house settled around her, not empty anymore, full of new life, new hope, new possibility. On the table was the red phone. The vest hung on the back of a chair. The frame bandana sat on the mantel next to Tobias's photo. Marlowe sat in her warm kitchen and thought about tomorrow, about the days ahead, about being 73 years old with a house that worked, food in the cupboards, and a family of 1,200 men she'd never met but who'd claimed her as their own. She thought about angels and debts and kindness that multiplied instead of diminishing. She thought about Tobias, picking up a stranger on a Montana highway in 1995, never knowing that act of compassion would ripple forward 31 years and save his wife from homelessness. She thought about opening her door to 20 freezing men and somehow, impossibly, gaining 1,000 brothers. And for the first time in 16 years, Marlowe Ashford went to bed not feeling alone. 3 years later, on a warm Saturday in June, a familiar rumble rolled down Highway 191. Marlowe looked up from her garden, where tomatoes grew in neat rows and chickens pecked at scattered grain. She smiled, right on time. 50 motorcycles pulled into her yard, the Portland chapter making their monthly visit. They'd been coming like clockwork. Sometimes it was Portland, sometimes Seattle, sometimes Boise or Billings or Spokane, but someone came every month. To check on her, to visit, to remind her she was family. Cade dismounted first. He'd retired from long-haul riding, bought a small house in Frost Hollow, and worked at the hardware store in town. But he still rode with his brothers when they came. "Mrs. Ashford," he said with a grin, "you're looking good." "Feeling good," Marlowe said. She was 76 now, but healthier than she'd been in years. Good food, warm house, no stress about money. It made a difference. Jackson climbed off his bike next, 22 years old now, working as a mechanic in Portland. But he never missed the Frost Hollow visits. Brought you something, he said, handing her a box. Inside was a quilt, beautifully made, patches of leather and fabric sewn together, each patch from a different chapter, each one signed. The sisters made it, Jackson explained. Wives and girlfriends of the Brotherhood. They wanted you to have it. Marlo ran her fingers over the patches. Seattle, Portland, Boise, Billings, Missoula, Helena, Great Falls, Spokane, Kalispell, Bend, Eugene, dozens more. It's beautiful, she whispered. Your family, Jackson said simply. This is what family does. They had lunch together. Marlo had cooked, of course, a huge pot of stew, fresh bread, pie made from apples from the tree the brothers had planted in her yard 2 years ago. The farmhouse that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and stories and life. After lunch, Dutch called. He did every Saturday, regular as the sunrise. How you doing, Angel? Good, Dutch. Portland chapter's here. They brought me a quilt. I heard about that. Margaret helped organize it. You like it? It's perfect. Good. Listen, I wanted to tell you something. Next month's the anniversary. 3 years since that first ride. We're planning something special. Dutch, you don't need to. We want to. Big gathering. All the chapters. Not just Northwest. We're inviting everyone. California, Nevada, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Montana, maybe 5,000 brothers. Biggest reunion we've ever done. And we're doing it there, in Frost Hollow, in your honor. Marlo sat down. 5,000? Give or take, that okay? We'll camp in the fields. Won't disturb the town too much, but we want to celebrate. 3 years ago, you reminded us what we're about, why we ride, why brotherhood matters. That's worth celebrating. Marlo looked around her kitchen, at the brothers sitting at her table, at the life that had bloomed from one night of kindness. Okay, she said. Yes, let's celebrate. The call ended. Marlo sat holding the phone, feeling the weight of it, the connection it represented, the promise it embodied. She looked at Tobias's photograph, at the bandana hanging beside it. We did good, she told him. You started something, and I kept it going, and now look. Look at what we built. Outside, the Portland brothers were playing with the goats, laughing like children. The sun was shining, the garden was growing, the house stood strong and proud, and Marlo Ashford, who had once been alone, who had once been forgotten, who had once been hours away from losing everything, sat in her warm kitchen and knew something profound. Kindness wasn't weakness, it was power. The power to change lives, to build families, to create ripples that spread farther than you could ever imagine. One night of kindness, one pot of soup, one door opened in a storm, and it had brought her this. All of this, 1,000 brothers, a restored home, a reason to keep going. She closed her eyes and smiled, and somewhere on the wind, she could almost hear Tobias saying what he'd said so many times, so many years ago. Always help the traveler, Marlo. You never know when you might be the one who needs help. She'd helped the travelers, and the travelers had helped her back. Forever.